Your submission being that firstly, Australia's low productivity and decline in per capita living standards is related to unsustainable migration settings, and secondly, that any serious long-term strategy for a settlement policy, productivity and economic growth has to focus on improving outcomes for Australians on a per capita basis with higher living standards and lower costs that works in their interest. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We can't continue relying on a model that just forever sort of expands the pie and hopes that as so long as aggregate GDP either stays level or slightly increases, that is going to be beneficial to the nation, right?
One of the questions I've been asking witnesses today is that aggregate GDP figure that is a measure of our economy's health. Is it your contention that using that as the measure has been masking the growing inequality that's occurring in community and the decrease in a per capita GDP kind of health, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. It's almost, in my view, an artificial mechanism to mask sort of the decline that's happening for most everyday Australians. People are suffering with cost of living. They can't afford the basics. Housing affordability is a crisis that just seems to get worse and worse. The only solutions from a lot of politicians seem to be just to subsidise demand, whether it be through mass migration or other mechanisms. And if you haven't bought a house, if you're trying to get on the property ladder, if you're already getting crushed by the cost of living crisis that we're currently under, things like bringing in 3,400 people every day, that puts your economic model on a footing that actually undermines everyday Australians. So whilst the aggregate figure might look good on a spreadsheet, the lived experience of normal Australians is completely opposite to that.
Which is, I think, where we're getting, Is there countries that do, I'll ask that on notice about substituting aggregate GDP for per capita. You also state that the migration system is disconnected from housing capacity that creates serious economic distortions. Would you prefer to see a migration or a population settings, I should say, because we do have our own babies, population settings more keenly tied to housing supply?
I mean, I think that would be a first step at a broad level, given how rampant the mass migration process has been over the last few years. Ideally, you would want to have a total pause to allow the system to reset and allow the economy to recover. That being said, though, I'm not a supporter of just mass producing infinite, dog boxes all across the city just to increase the supply of housing, right? Like, people's communities matter, people's suburbs matter, living in a high trust society matters. And I think that we shouldn't make the mistake of assuming that we should just increase the supply of everything everywhere all at once in the hope that that will alleviate the problem. The solutions that we're proposing are quite easy. You just have a single minister roll out and announce a single migration intake for a set period and allow the economy to breathe and allow everyday Australians to have a little bit of breathing room.
What are the most significant consequences for productivity growth and living standards from the notion that our current population growth is substantially outpacing housing completions, affordability and availability?
Well, I mean, effectively what we're doing is we're adding fuel to a fire, right? So you have issues here where you have a finite. I mean, we all know this is basic 101. We have a finite supply of property. You have a finite supply of even resources. In a cost of living crisis and a fuel supply crisis, you even have a finite supply of that. And yet, if you are bringing in people to a level where I think in the September quarter of last year, almost 80% of population growth was due to migration, well, these just add to the issues that are being experienced by everyday Australians. Now, at a top-line level, GDP might look acceptable and economic output might look acceptable, and maybe for major corporations and multinationals, it's good for them. But for everyday Australians, is it? I would argue it's not. And our responsibility is to deliver for the majority.
There's significant debate around the term mass migration. For clarity, what do you mean when you use the word and the term mass migration?
Well, when you're looking at a figure of around 100,000 people coming into Australia in the month of February alone, I think that would be a clear example of mass migration. These numbers are almost the word I'm looking for here. I mean, these numbers, it's like a never-ending supply that we just cannot keep up with. And it is being used as a stopgap for an economy that is stagnant and that is failing. So something needs to happen, right? Small businesses are struggling. Medium-sized businesses are struggling. There needs to be a whole raft of mechanisms to actually reduce regulations on these businesses, slash their taxes, allow them to actually compete and to prosper. We're not doing that. We're simultaneously strangling small and medium-sized businesses through over-regulation, over-taxation, and a whole raft of measures, whilst then wondering why they're not being productive, and then just importing a class of people to try and mask over our economic decline. It's a flawed model, and maybe it works temporarily and maybe it's politically viable on a short-term basis, but long-term it hollows out our nation.
Do you have does your research indicate what a sort of a migration number or level that would be sustainable and appropriate for a country like Australia? And
I'd have to give you the exact figure on notice, but as a rough ballpark, less than 100,000 per year.
And is that because we heard evidence this morning about permanent migration rates versus temporary migrants that have failed to go home post their visa settings finishing. And so I would like maybe on notice for you to give a view around that. Are there particular aspects of the program that you would focus on to have a more sustainable migration level? Would it be focusing on skilled migrants, family reunion, international students? I mean, do you have a view about the different visa classes?
International student numbers need to be severely reduced. The idea that universities are only propping themselves up through importing more and more international students year on year is atrocious. If they need another economic model to support universities to actually deliver the outcomes that they're meant to, which is to educate Australians and give them the skills that they need to help Australia prosper, then that needs to be tackled. But we can't allow, in my view, major universities to effectively turn themselves into visa farms for profit. It's an atrocious way to operate. Separate to that, look, there's always going to be the case of having highly skilled people come to Australia and help Australia prosper. That's totally fine. But can we seriously say that all of the 100,000 people that came to Australia in February are skilled migrants that are going to, make the economy boom? They haven't in the last half a decade. So why do we expect anything different?